In the late autumn of 1992, the town of Cold Hollow, Montana, sat like a forgotten bruise on the edge of the Bitterroot Valley, its 200 souls scattered across sagging ranch houses and frost-cracked roads that led nowhere but deeper into the pines. The air carried the bite of coming snow, and the mountains loomed, their peaks clawing at a sky that seemed too low, too heavy, as if it were pressing down on the town with intent. Cold Hollow was a place where people didn't ask questions, not about the rusted cattle gates that swung open on windless nights, not about the coyotes that howled in patterns too precise to be natural, and certainly not about the lights that flickered in the hills, brief and sharp, like the glint of a knife. The townsfolk kept their eyes down, their doors locked, and their radios tuned to static, because everyone knew, though no one said, that something in Cold Hollow listened when the frequencies hummed. It was here, in this uneasy quiet, that Sarah Tillinghast, a 34-year-old electrician with a smoker's rasp and a habit of talking to herself, found the first crack in the town's fragile reality, a crack that would split wide enough to swallow them all. Sarah had lived in Cold Hollow her entire life, her days spent untangling wires in basements and attics, her nights alone in a double-wide trailer with a leaking roof and a view of the northern hills. She was practical, grounded, the kind of woman who scoffed at ghost stories but still checked her locks twice before bed. That October, she'd been hired to fix the wiring at the old AM radio tower on Blackthorn Ridge, a skeletal structure that hadn't broadcast anything but static since the station went bankrupt in '87. The tower was a relic, its guy wires sagging like the tendons of a dying animal, its control shack a concrete box streaked with moss and graffiti. The job came from a man named Harlan, a reclusive rancher who owned the land and claimed the tower's generator was acting up, though he wouldn't say why he cared about a defunct station. Sarah didn't ask. Work was scarce, and Voss paid in cash. She drove her battered Ford up the ridge at dusk, her toolbox rattling in the bed, the sky bruising purple above her. The air felt wrong, too still, too thick, like she was breathing through cloth. When she reached the tower, the generator was silent, but the shack's door hung ajar. Its padlock snapped clean in half. Inside, the control room smelled of ozone and something sweeter, like rotting fruit. The equipment was ancient, banks of dials and switches, a reel-to-reel recorder coated in dust, and a single bulb flickering overhead, casting jagged shadows. Sarah's flashlight beam caught a spiderweb of cracks in the concrete wall, as if something had struck it from the other side. She muttered to herself, a habit that kept the silence at bay, and set to work on the generator. It was then she noticed the hum, not from the machinery, but from the air itself, a low, bone-deep vibration that made her teeth ache. She froze, her wrench hovering over a bolt, and listened. The hum wasn't steady. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, in a rhythm she couldn't place. 7 short, 3 long, 7 short again. She glanced at the reel-to-reel, its spools turning slowly, impossibly, without power. The hum grew louder, and the bulb overhead flared, then burst, plunging the shack into darkness. Sarah's breath caught as her flashlight flickered, its beams stuttering across the room. In that moment, she saw it. A shape in the corner, tall and thin, its edges blurring like heat haze, its face a smear of light that wasn't there. She stumbled back, her boot catching on a cable, and the hum stopped. The shape was gone. The reel-to-reel clicked off. Her flashlight steadied. She stood there, heart hammering, telling herself it was a trick of the dark, but her hands shook as she packed her tools and fled. Back in her trailer, Sarah couldn't sleep. The hum lingered in her ears, a ghost of sound that followed her into the quiet. She checked the locks, poured a glass of bourbon, and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the hills where the tower stood. Around 3:17 a.m., her radio, a cheap Sears model she kept for baseball games, crackled to life. No station, no voice, just that same hum, pulsing through the static. 7, 3, 7. She yanked the plug from the wall, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, until it wasn't just sound, but pressure, pushing against her skull. She clutched her head, her vision swimming, and saw flashes, images that didn't belong to her. A desert of black glass, a sky split by a spiral of light, figures moving in lockstep toward a horizon that bent upward. The radio fell silent, and Sarah sat there, gasping, her bourbon glass shattered on the floor. She didn't know what she'd heard, but she knew it wasn't human. The next morning, she drove back to the tower, not to fix it, but to understand. The shack was different now, cleaner, the cracks in the wall gone, the reel-to-reel spotless, its tape missing. On the floor, etched into the concrete, was a symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines radiating outward, like a sun with broken rays. Sarah traced it with her finger and felt a jolt, like static, that left her arm numb. She didn't notice the sky above the tower, where a single cloud hung motionless, its edges too sharp, too perfect, like it had been cut from the heavens. The town began to change. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. Streetlights flickered in patterns that matched the hum Sarah had heard. Dogs stopped barking, their eyes fixed on the hills as if waiting for a command. Children at the elementary school drew the same symbol Sarah had seen, a broken sun in their notebooks, on desks, in the dirt. Parents whispered about nightmares, shared dreams of a sky that wasn't theirs, of voices that spoke in tones too low to be human. Sarah kept quiet, but she listened. At the diner, old men talked of lights in the hills, brighter now, moving in arcs that defied physics. A rancher claimed his cattle had wandered into a field and vanished, leaving only their hooves embedded in the ground. Sarah started carrying a notebook, jotting down what she heard, what she saw, what she dreamed. Her own dreams were vivid, relentless. She stood in a field under a sky of churning light, her hands tracing symbols she didn't understand, her voice speaking words that burned her throat. Each morning she woke with her fingers stained black, as if she'd been writing in her sleep. She checked her locks, her windows, her mirrors, but found nothing, until she looked closer at the mirror in her bathroom and saw, for a split second, her reflection blink out of sync. Harlan Voss came to her trailer a week later, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't sit, didn't take the coffee she offered. He spoke in a low, hurried voice, saying the tower wasn't his idea, that they had told him to keep it running, though he wouldn't say who they were. He handed her a Polaroid, its edges singed, showing the tower at night, surrounded by lights that hovered like fireflies but cast no glow. In the foreground, a figure stood, too tall, too thin, its face a blur of static. Sarah's stomach twisted. She asked Harlan what he wanted, and he said, "Shut it down." But his voice cracked, and his hands shook, and she saw the same symbol, the broken sun, carved into the back of his neck, raw and weeping. That night, Sarah dreamed of Harlan standing at the tower, his body unraveling into threads of light, his screams swallowed by the hum. When she woke, her radio was on again, unplugged, playing a sound like breathing, slow and deliberate, as if something vast were exhaling through the speaker. She grabbed her toolbox and drove to the tower, not knowing what she'd do, but knowing she couldn't stay away. The air was heavier now, the pines bending inward, the sky a sickly gray. As she climbed the ridge, she saw the lights, dozens of them, pulsing in the distance, moving in a spiral that matched the rhythm in her head. 7, 3, 7. The tower on Blackthorn Ridge had become a wound in the world, its presence bleeding into cold hollow like ink into water. By mid-November, the town was unraveling, its edges fraying under the weight of something no one could name. The hum was everywhere now, not just in radios, but in the walls, the ground, the bones of those who lived too close to the ridge. It was no longer a sound, but a force, a pulse that reshaped reality in subtle, horrifying ways. Street signs twisted overnight, their letters forming words no one could read. Clocks ran backward, then stopped at 3:17 a.m., the hour the signal first spoke. The air carried a metallic tang, like blood, and the northern hills glowed faintly at night, a sickly green that pulsed in time with the hum. Sarah Tillinghast, once a skeptic, now carried her notebook like a talisman, its pages filled with sketches of the broken sun, fragments of dreams, and notes on the lights that no one else would admit they saw. She hadn't slept properly in weeks, her eyes shadowed, her hands stained with that strange black residue that wouldn't wash off. She told herself she was investigating, that she could stop whatever this was, but deep down, she knew she was being pulled toward the tower, toward the lights, toward something that knew her name. Sarah wasn't alone in her obsession. The town was fracturing into those who ignored the signs and those who couldn't. At the community center, a group of ranchers formed a prayer circle, their voices trembling as they begged for deliverance from the devil in the hills. Others, like Clara, the town's librarian, took a different approach. Clara, a wiry woman in her 50s with a penchant for conspiracy theories, had been cataloging the anomalies, missing pets, power surges, children speaking in unison about the ones who watch. She showed Sarah a map she'd drawn, pinning every strange event to a grid that spiraled outward from the tower. The pattern was undeniable, a mandala of incidents with the broken sun symbol appearing at every major site. Clara's hands shook as she pointed to a Polaroid taped to the map. A field near the ridge, its grass flattened into a perfect circle, the soil inside gleaming like obsidian. In the center, a single shoe, its laces tied, as if its owner had simply stepped out of it and vanished. Sarah recognized the shoe. It belonged to Harlan Voss. She hadn't seen him since his visit, and no one in town would talk about him, as if his name had been erased from their minds. The tower itself was changing. Sarah returned to it daily, each visit more disorienting than the last. The shack's walls were smoother now, the cracks gone, the concrete gleaming like polished bone. The reel-to-reel was always running, its tape looping endlessly, though no one touched it. The hum was louder, more complex, layered with sounds that weren't sounds. Whispers, clicks, a low moan that seemed to come from beneath the earth. Sarah found new symbols etched into the equipment, the floor, even the rusted tower itself, each one a variation of the broken sun. She photographed them, but the images came out blurred, the symbols twisting into something else. Eyes, spirals, faces that weren't there when she looked again. One night, she stayed too long, her flashlight catching a reflection in the shack's window. A reflection that wasn't hers. It was her face, but wrong. The eyes too wide, the mouth stretched into a smile that didn't move. She backed away, her breath fogging in the suddenly freezing air, and heard a voice, not from the radio, but inside her head, soft and insistent. "You see us." She ran, her truck's engine stuttering as she fled down the ridge, the lights in the hills brighter now, forming a constellation that seemed to follow her home. Cold Hollow's residents were dreaming the same dream. It began with a field of black glass, the sky above a churning spiral of light. Figures moved in the distance, tall and thin, their limbs bending at angles that hurt to look at. They didn't speak, but their presence was a weight, a command to follow. Those who dreamed woke screaming, their hands clutching at invisible wounds, their mirrors showing reflections that lingered too long. At the elementary school, a teacher named Paul Gresham found his students drawing the dream in perfect detail, their crayons snapping as they pressed too hard. He tried to stop them, but their eyes were blank, their voices chanting in unison. 7, 3, 7. Paul quit the next day, packed his car, and drove south. His car was found a week later, abandoned on a logging road, its dashboard covered in symbols scratched with a knife. Paul was gone, but his shoes were neatly placed on the driver's seat, laces tied. Sarah heard the story at the diner, where the waitresses whispered about the taken, a term that spread like wildfire. No one knew who was next, but everyone felt it. A pressure, a pull, like the town was being drawn into a funnel with the tower at its center. The UFO sightings began in earnest. At first, they were dismissed as overactive imaginations, lights in the sky, nothing more. But the reports grew too frequent, too consistent. Ranchers saw orbs hovering over their fields, silent, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. A trucker on Highway 93 swore a disc-shaped craft paced his rig for 10 miles, its edges blurring into the dark, its presence making his CB radio scream with static. Sarah saw them too, one night on her porch, 3 lights in a triangle, pulsing in time with the hum in her head. They didn't move like planes or drones. They danced, spiraling upward until they vanished, leaving a void in the sky that hurt to look at. She sketched them in her notebook, her hands shaking, the black residue thicker now, smearing the pages. Clara, who'd been tracking the sightings, showed Sarah a grainy video from a hunter's trail cam. A craft hovering over the ridge, its underside etched with the broken sun, its light bending the trees around it. The video cut off after 6 seconds. The camera's lens cracked, its memory card fried. Clara's voice was hoarse as she said, "They're not visiting, they're already here." The paranormal activity escalated. Doors opened and closed on their own, their hinges creaking in the rhythm of the hum. Shadows moved in empty rooms, their shapes too tall, too fluid. At the church, the organ played a single note at 3:17 a.m., though no one was there, the sound echoing through the town like a summons. Sarah's trailer was no longer safe. Her mirrors cracked overnight, her radio played even when unplugged, and her bed shifted slightly each morning, as if someone had stood on it while she slept. She found footprints in the frost outside her trailer, too large, too elongated, with no tread or texture, leading toward the hills and stopping abruptly, as if their maker had lifted into the air. She tried to tell herself it was a prank, but the hum was in her now, a constant presence that whispered in her dreams, urging her to return to the tower. She resisted, but the pull was stronger each day, and the lights in the hills were closer, their glow seeping into her windows, painting her walls with patterns she couldn't unsee. By late November, Cold Hollow was a town under siege. The power grid failed, but the streetlights stayed on, flickering in sync with the hum. The water tower rusted overnight, its surface etched with symbols that bled when touched. People stopped going outside after dark, their curtains drawn, their radios smashed. But the hum found them anyway, slipping through walls, through skin, through thought. Sarah and Clara formed an uneasy alliance, meeting in secret at the library, their notes spread across a table littered with coffee cups and cigarette butts. They pieced together a theory. The tower wasn't broadcasting the signal, it was receiving it, amplifying it, reshaping the town into something else. The UFOs weren't ships, but projections, manifestations of a presence that had always been here, buried deep, waiting. The broken sun was its mark, its signature, and Cold Hollow was its canvas. They decided to destroy the tower, to cut the signal at its source. But as they planned, the library's lights flickered, and the hum surged, louder than ever. The windows rattled, and outside, the lights in the hills formed a spiral, tightening, descending, coming for them. December came to Cold Hollow like a fever, the town now a shadow of itself, its streets empty, its houses silent, its sky a canvas of unnatural light. The hum was omnipresent, a living thing that pulsed through the earth, the air, the minds of those who remained. The tower on Blackthorn Ridge was no longer just a structure. It was a beacon, a heart, its metal glowing faintly at night, its symbols shifting like words in a language no one could speak. Sarah Tillinghast and Clara were among the last to resist, their bodies worn, their minds frayed by sleepless nights and dreams that weren't theirs. The lights in the hills were constant now, a spiral of orbs that tightened each night, their glow seeping into the town like poison. The UFOs were bolder, hovering over rooftops, their surfaces etched with the broken sun, their presence bending reality, Clocks melted, shadows stretched, and the air grew heavy with a pressure that made noses bleed. Cold Hollow was no longer a place. It was a stage, and something vast was rewriting the script, with Sarah and Clara as its reluctant players. The plan to destroy the tower was desperate, born of fear and a dwindling hope that they could stop the signal. Sarah and Clara gathered what they could: dynamite stolen from a quarry, gasoline cans, a crowbar for the shack's reinforced door. They drove to the ridge under a sky that churned with light, the clouds forming spirals that mirrored the symbols in Sarah's notebook. The tower loomed larger than before, its silhouette wrong, its angles bending in ways that hurt the eyes. The shack was sealed, its door now a slab of smooth metal, etched with the broken sun, its surface warm to the touch. Sarah pried at it, her crowbar slipping, her hands burning as the metal pulsed like a living thing. Clara set the dynamite, her fingers trembling, her eyes fixed on the lights above, dozens of them, circling, their hum syncing with the towers. As they worked, the ground shook, a low tremor that sent pebbles skittering. The air grew colder, the pines bending inward, their needles falling like ash. Sarah heard the voice again, inside her head. "You see us. You call us." She dropped the crowbar, her vision swimming, and saw Clara staring at her, her face pale, her mouth moving without sound, forming the rhythm, 7, 3, 7. The explosion was meant to be controlled, but nothing in Cold Hollow obeyed human intent anymore. The dynamite detonated, a roar that shook the ridge, but the tower stood untouched, its metal gleaming brighter, the hum surging into a scream. The shack collapsed, its walls crumbling into dust, revealing a chamber beneath, a spiral staircase descending into darkness, its steps carved with symbols that glowed faintly, like embers. Sarah and Clara stared, their plan in ruins, the lights above tightening their spiral, descending toward the tower. The air was alive now, crackling with static, the smell of ozone and rotting fruit overwhelming. Sarah's notebook fell from her pocket, its pages fluttering open, the symbols she'd drawn pulsing in time with the staircase. Clara grabbed her arm, shouting to run, but Sarah couldn't move. The hum was in her, through her, rewriting her thoughts. She saw flashes, black glass deserts, skies of spiral light, figures moving in lockstep, their faces her own, over and over, 1,000 versions of herself marching toward a horizon that wasn't there. Clara pulled her back, and they stumbled down the ridge, the lights pursuing, their glow burning through the pines, setting the air alight with patterns that screamed meaning without words. Cold Hollow was gone by morning, not destroyed, not abandoned, gone. The houses, the diner, the school, erased as if they'd never been, the ground smooth, unmarked, gleaming like obsidian. The tower remained, alone on the ridge, its hum now a pulse that echoed across the valley. Sarah and Clara hid in a hunting cabin 10 miles away, their bodies bruised, their minds splintered. They didn't speak of what they'd seen in the staircase, but Sarah's dreams were relentless. She descended the steps, each one colder, the darkness alive with eyes that blinked sideways, voices that whispered her name in a language older than stone. Clara's map was gone, but she'd memorized it, and she drew it again, her hands shaking, the spiral pattern now a perfect replica of the lights they'd seen. They tried to leave the valley, but the roads looped back, the pines closing in, the sky always leading them back to the ridge. Their truck's radio played the hum, even with the battery dead, and the dashboard clock froze at 3:17 a.m. Sarah's hands were black now, the residue spreading up her arms, forming patterns she couldn't read but understood on some primal level. Clara's eyes were changing, their pupils elongating, reflecting light like a cat's. The final night came without warning. The lights descended, not just over the ridge but across the valley, a spiral so tight it seemed to drill into the earth. The tower glowed, its symbols shifting faster, forming a face, not human, not alien, but something that knew them, that had always known them. Sarah and Clara returned to the ridge, not by choice but by compulsion, their feet moving without thought, the hum guiding them like a leash. The staircase was open, its darkness deeper now, a void that swallowed light and sound. Sarah stepped forward, her body no longer hers, her voice chanting the rhythm. 7, 3, 7. Clara tried to stop her, but the light surged, and Clara's body unraveled, her form dissolving into threads of light that spiraled down the stairs. Sarah followed, the steps endless, the air freezing, the voices louder, clearer, speaking not to her but through her. She saw the truth at the bottom. Not a ship, not a creature, but a presence, a memory embedded in the earth, older than life, waiting for the signal to wake. It wasn't alien, it was home, a piece of the world that had been buried, forgotten, but never gone. The valley was silent by dawn. The tower was gone, the ridge smooth, the pines standing straight. No trace of Cold Hollow remained, no record of its people, its history, its end. But the hum lingered, faint, carried on the wind, heard only by those who passed too close to the Bitterroot Valley. Truckers reported lights in the distance, brief and sharp, like the glint of a knife. Children in nearby towns drew symbols they couldn't explain, circles with broken rays, their parents dreaming of a sky that wasn't theirs. Sarah Tillinghast was never found, but her notebook surfaced years later, in a pawn shop in Missoula, its pages filled with words no one could read. Its final entry, a single sentence: "We are the signal, and the signal is us." The shop burned down the next day, the flames blue, the notebook untouched. Somewhere, deep beneath the valley, the staircase waits, its steps cold, its darkness alive, listening for the next voice to call it home.